Have you ever noticed how certain ideas or, I don't know, movements, even popular brands, seem to just take on a life of their own? It's almost like there's this invisible force guiding collective behavior, influencing us, maybe shaping our reality.
Yeah, it's a really profound observation.
What if there's actually more to these phenomena than meets the eye? Something, deeper than just slick marketing or social trends.
Exactly. And once you start looking for it, these intangible energies, they become remarkably apparent. You see them in daily life.
So
They gather around concepts, institutions, even digital spaces now. It's almost as if they're these living entities subtly shaping our reality in ways we rarely acknowledge.
Okay, so that's exactly what we're diving into today. This fascinating and I think increasingly relevant concept of egregores.
Powerful thought forms, yeah. Created and sustained by our collective belief.
And to really get our heads around their origin and impact, we're going straight to a foundational text, the one that really brought these ideas into broader public awareness, Thought Forms, a record of clairvoyant investigation.
By the theosophists Annie Besant and Charles Webster Leadbeater, a really pivotal work.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly what egregores are. We want to trace their historical understanding, especially back to this book.
And explore how they form, how they function in our modern, super interconnected world, and maybe most importantly, get some insight into how we can consciously interact with these unseen forces.
Right. And we'll also take a look at what modern readers are saying about this book. It's over a century old. But what are people on Amazon saying about it now? I think that gives a unique perspective on its relevance today.
Definitely. It shows its enduring appeal.
Okay, let's unpack this then.
Yeah.
Because the very idea, that collective thought, can actually coalesce into something with its own energy. It feels a bit wild at first, almost science fiction,
It does initially.
But like you said, once you start to recognize it, you see it everywhere, from the subtle stuff to the really profound things. It's a paradigm shift, really, in how you view the world. You start seeing patterns you never noticed before.
Indeed. And gaining an understanding of egregores, it isn't just, an intellectual curiosity anymore. It's becoming arguably urgently necessary, especially in today's complex world.
Urgently necessary. Why so urgent?
Well, it gives us this critical lens, a way to examine our own participation in these dynamics, how they might be subtly or maybe not so subtly influencing our choices, our emotions, our collective direction. It's about awareness.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Let's try and unravel this enigma of egregores. What exactly are these thought forms? The name itself, egregores, sounds kind of powerful. Where does it come from?
It does have a fascinating origin. The term egregore actually comes from the ancient Greek word egregoroi.
Egregore.
Yeah, it translates to watchers, or maybe those who are awake. It was later picked up by various occult traditions, esoteric philosophy, to describe these powerful psychic entities that, arise from collective human consciousness.
Watchers. Okay. So not just a shared idea then.
Far more than that. That's the crucial thing to grasp. It's not just a fleeting collective emotion like everyone feeling happy at a concert. Once an egregore is formed, it's described as developing an apparent autonomy.
Apparent autonomy. What does that mean exactly? Like it thinks for itself?
Not quite like a person thinks. It means it starts to operate with a seeming will of its own. It can actually influence the very people who created it, who fed it their energy. It's not truly independent, not sentient like us, but it acts with such coherence and direction that it appears to have its own life, its own agenda.
Wow. So it's like a feedback loop. The group creates it and then it influences the group.
Exactly. A powerful dynamic feedback loop between the collective and its energetic construct. That's what makes it so different.
That idea of a feedback loop and this apparent autonomy, that's really key, isn't it?
Yeah.
It sets egregores apart. I think you could really see this if you think about, say, a huge sports team's fan base.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine that electric feeling, that almost palpable atmosphere in a stadium during a big championship game.
You can feel it.
All that collective excitement, the shared hope, everyone chanting together, even the collective despair when things go wrong. All that intense, focused emotion. It doesn't just vanish, does it?
No, it builds something.
It generates this almost tangible, energetic atmosphere. It seems to just envelop everyone there, from the players right down on the field to the folks way up in the nosebleed seats.
And it has an effect.
Right. This energy, it can influence how the players perform. It can amplify how the crowd behaves. And you even feel that distinct vibe when you leave the stadium afterwards. That's a pretty good everyday example of an egregore at play, wouldn't you say?
That's a perfect illustration, really. The shared focus, the intense emotion, that collective will, it all funnels into and strengthens that particular egregore. It makes it a force that you can feel, that you experience, and one that can even act upon its creators.
Okay, so that brings up a really important question then. How do these collective thought forms, these egregores, differ from other, maybe more familiar spiritual or mental constructs? Things we might hear about more often.
That's a critical distinction to make, yeah, because it helps clarify exactly what we're dealing with here. So, egregores are distinct from, for instance, servitors.
Servitors, what are those?
Servitors are often described in, like, magical traditions. They're usually seen as consciously created energetic constructs, typically by just one person or maybe a small group, and they're made for specific, often temporary purposes.
Ah, like a tool.
Exactly. Think of them like a specialized energetic tool you forge for a particular job. You create it, it does its thing, and then typically you dissolve it when its purpose is fulfilled.
Okay, and how are egregores different from, say, gods or spirits, things that people believe exist independently?
Right. Egregores are also different from what we commonly understand as gods or spirits. Those are typically understood to exist independently of human belief, or at least to predate human consciousness. A deity, for example, is generally perceived to exist whether or not humans believe in it.
So what's the key difference with egregores?
The crucial differentiator is their fundamental dependency on human energy. Human attention, human belief, that's what they need to exist. They are born from us, they're sustained by us. Without that continuous input, they would, in theory at least, diminish and eventually dissolve.
So they're like mirrors of us.
In a sense, yes, mirrors of our collective consciousness. Now, once they get established, they can appear to act with remarkable independence and influence, sometimes even influencing their creators in ways that seem to override individual will. But that core dependency remains.
And that dependency makes them really relevant to how societies work.
Yeah, exactly. It makes them particularly relevant to how human societies, institutions, and larger systems function. And it raises some profound implications, doesn't it?
Like what?
Well, does this mean that if enough people just stopped believing in or stopped feeding energy to a particular egregore, say a harmful political ideology or a super pervasive consumerist brand, would it just dissolve?
Could it?
What are the practical implications of that idea for social movements, for political change, or even for our own personal liberation from influences we don't want? It's a big question.
And this isn't just, like you said, for esoteric circles or philosophical debates. You feel the relevance of understanding egregores is really evident, even urgently necessary today.
I do, and some of the sources we looked at argue that very strongly. Just look at the challenging landscape we're all navigating daily. The rise of, well, political extremism, the deepening social divisions we see everywhere.
Growing economic inequality.
Right. That seems almost unstoppable sometimes. And of course, the accelerating environmental destruction that often feels way beyond our individual control.
You can see how these forces might be at play there.
Absolutely. These invisible forces, these egregores, they manifest with striking clarity in phenomena like fervent nationalist movements. Those draw immense power from collective identity, often fueled by an exaggerated sense of us versus them, and usually an underlying fear of the other.
And in the economy.
We also see them at work in, say, wealth-hoarding economic systems that perpetuate these vast disparities. They seem to operate with an almost ingrained will that favors accumulation, often regardless of the human cost.
And the media.
Oh, definitely. They're deeply embedded in modern media ecosystems, especially those designed specifically to feed on fear, on outrage, on constant engagement, sometimes regardless of factual accuracy. The City Witch source, for instance, points directly to the rise of far-right politics and the erosion of individual rights as particularly stark examples of how these powerful egregores are actively playing out in our contemporary society. They aren't just abstract ideas, they are actively shaping our world right now.
And this is where it really connects directly to you, the listener, right?
Yeah.
Because recognizing how these thought forms operate, it gives us insight into our own participation.
Exactly.
Are we maybe inadvertently feeding a harmful egregore with our attention, our clicks, our shared outrage online, or just our energetic contributions day to day?
It forces us to ask that question.
And if we are, how can we consciously choose to maybe withdraw that energy and redirect it towards more life-affirming patterns, towards movements and ideals that we actually believe serve the greater good?
It shifts the perspective, doesn't it? From being a passive recipient of influence to becoming an active participant, someone with real agency.
Okay, this is probably a good moment to remind everyone. Before we go on, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like the video. This podcast is known as the Deep Seek Diaries, and you can find us on the major social media platforms like YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Linked in the description section are all the resources in discussion today, including books, websites, and so on. Please go through our terms and conditions as soon as you can. Now sit back and enjoy the podcast.
All right, so to really get to the heart of egregores, especially thinking about their modern understanding and the spiritual movements they came from, we really need to dive into that foundational text we mentioned, Thought Forms, a record of clairvoyant investigation.
Right, the Besant and Leadbeater book. Now, these authors, they were key figures in theosophy, weren't they? For listeners who might not know, what exactly was theosophy?
Yeah, they were major figures. Theosophy was a really significant esoteric movement, especially around the turn of the 20th century. It aimed to blend elements from global spiritual traditions, things like Hinduism and Buddhism, with Western occultism and even contemporary scientific inquiry.
Kind of a synthesis.
Exactly. Besant and Leadbeater were deeply committed to exploring these hidden dimensions of reality, of human consciousness. The specific edition of Thought Forms we're mainly looking at today was meticulously edited by Lucy Lord Campana, and it has a really insightful introduction by the occult author Mitch Horowitz. It came out in 2020.
And their collaboration on the original book, it points to this shared mystical framework they had, right? A belief that there were unseen energetic dimensions that certain people, clairvoyants, could actually perceive.
And that belief wasn't just theoretical for them, it's the entire premise of the book. Thought Forms is completely rooted in their claimed clairvoyant abilities, their ability to literally see the energetic manifestations of thoughts, emotions, even music.
See them how? Like pictures.
They claim to perceive these as distinct, vibrant forms in the human aura and also in the general atmosphere. Each form supposedly had specific colors, specific shapes, movements, all corresponding to the nature of the thought or the feeling behind it. And they presented this not as just speculation, but as an observable phenomenon, albeit an extraordinary one, requiring clairvoyant sight.
So how did this groundbreaking idea, and specifically this book with all those iconic illustrations, how did it first come about? Was it like a sudden flash of inspiration?
It was definitely more of an evolution. The actual genesis of the book was an article Annie Besant wrote herself. It was titled Thought Forms, and it appeared back in September 1896 in Lucifer, which was a prominent theosophical journal at the time.
So it started as an article.
Yes. Then Charles Leadbeater worked closely with Besant, meticulously developing the concept further. They based it on their ongoing clairvoyant observations. They described these very precise, complex, energetic forms they were seeing to a team of artists.
Artists, so they didn't draw them themselves.
No, they collaborated. The artists then had the challenging task of translating these complex visions into the striking images that became so central to the book. The illustrations, by the way, were painted by a Mr. John Varley, who was actually the grandson of another famous artist also named John Varley, and also Mr. Prince and Miss McFarlane.
That collaboration itself is fascinating. Sears describing visions to artists, trying to make the invisible visible.
Exactly. It was quite unique for its time.
Now, I remember reading there's a little bit of historical confusion around the book's exact publication date. The Amazon page for the 2020 edition says first released in 1901, but other sources suggest the fully illustrated book came later.
Yes, that's a detail that really highlights the challenges of historical record-keeping, especially in esoteric publishing back then. The Theosophy Wiki and other reliable sources like the expert John L. Crow point out a common publication error. Subsequent editions often incorrectly stated first printed in 1901 on their title pages.
Ah, so the 1901 date is likely wrong for the illustrated book.
It seems so. The actual first edition of the fully illustrated Thought Forms book, the one with all the famous pictures, came out in 1905. Crow meticulously documented how this 1901 error got propagated through later editions and even library catalogs, leading to this persistent confusion.
Any idea why the error happened?
Well, Kurt Leland, who's an Annie Besant specialist, theorized that the publishers might have been confused by Besant's other closely related book, Thought Power, Its Control and Culture. And that one was published in 1901. And it explored similar concepts about mental energy and its influence, but crucially, it didn't have the extensive visual component of Thought Forms.
Okay, that makes sense. So the core ideas were floating around in 1901, but the iconic illustrated book Thought Forms landed in 1905.
Precisely. And this historical detail, it kind of underscores the careful, dedicated process they undertook, evolving these abstract ideas from an article into a comprehensive, visually rich book. It shows a real commitment to making these complex concepts accessible.
Yeah, it does. And it makes you wonder, like you said, how common was it back then, turn of the century, for esoteric thinkers to work so closely with artists to illustrate clairvoyant experiences? It really speaks to that era's blend of maybe scientific curiosity and deep spiritual exploration, pushing boundaries.
It was a unique time.
And the book's core claims, suggesting thoughts are actual objects. That was radical then, and still feels pretty radical now, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Thought Forms makes this incredibly audacious claim. It presents itself as an in-depth exploration on the visual manifestations of thoughts and the notion that they exist as objects. The book itself consists of 58 meticulously detailed illustrations.
58.
Each one supposedly based on Besant and Leadbeater's direct clairvoyant observations. They show how various stimuli, like different kinds of music, specific emotions, anger, love, devotion, profound spiritual experiences, even just the subtle nuances of color, how these things affect and shape these ethereal thought forms.
Can you give an example? What did they claim anger looked like?
For instance, they described a sudden burst of anger potentially appearing as sharp, jagged, maybe scarlet red flashes in the aura, whereas a feeling of peaceful devotion might manifest as soft, symmetrical forms in serene blues and purples.
Wow, that's so specific.
Very specific. And this was profoundly radical for its time. It suggested thoughts weren't just ephemeral, abstract things happening inside your head, but that they had a tangible, visual, energetic reality that exists outside of us, capable of interacting with the world. These vibrant, detailed illustrations are absolutely central to the book's appeal and its lasting influence.
And what's truly incredible, almost unbelievable, is that the influence of these visually striking concepts, these pictures of thoughts, it extended way beyond just occult studies or theosophy circles, didn't it? It actually had a huge impact on modern art.
It did indeed. A profound, often understated impact. The book had great influence on 20th century art, directly inspiring some of the most seminal figures of the modern art movement.
Like who?
Artists such as Wassily Kandinsky, often called the pioneer of abstract art, Pete Mondrian, known for his geometric grids, Paul Klee, Hilma af Klint, whose abstract work actually predated Kandinsky's by several years.
Really?
Yes. And even contemporary artists like Judy Chicago, all of them drew significant inspiration from thought forms. Richard Smalley, who's a leading authority on these traditions, states pretty unequivocally that thought forms, along with Besant and Leadbeater's other related book, Man, Visible and Invisible, was one of the major influences on Kandinsky's groundbreaking work.
Kandinsky, his book on the spiritual in art is huge, isn't it?
Absolutely massive. Published in 1912, Maurice Tuckman, who was a senior curator at LSCMA, famously called it perhaps the most influential doctrine by an artist of the 20th century.
Okay, that's a huge claim. So how exactly did a book about clairvoyant visions of thought forms inspire a whole movement like abstract art? What was the direct link there?
Well, Kandinsky had this deep belief. He felt that in his time, viewers had become sort of numb, inured, as he put it, to any kind of deeper inner meaning in art. He called this inner meaning Stimmung.
Stimmung, like apathy or mood.
Something like that, yeah, but deeper, a spiritual resonance. And he contended that art's focus on just representing forms from the natural external world was actively blocking this deeper apprehension. He was convinced that the art of the future had to break through this representational barrier through the radical use of pure color, pure shape, pure line, in a word, abstraction. He wanted to evoke direct spiritual and emotional responses in the viewer without needing recognizable objects as intermediaries.
And thought forms helped with that.
Exactly. The vibrant, non-representational forms and the color-emotion correspondences illustrated in thought forms provided him and others like them with a visual vocabulary, a conceptual framework for this exact pursuit. Through Kandinsky's influential theories and other channels like the anthroposophist Rudolf Steiner, the very visual language and underlying principles of thought forms described by Besant and Leadbeater genuinely shaped 20th century art. It inspired that revolutionary break from representation towards pure abstraction, all with the aim of expressing inner meaning. It's a really powerful example of esoteric thought directly influencing mainstream culture.
That's truly incredible. To think a book about seeing energy could be so foundational for how we perceive art today. But it's important to clarify, the authors, Besant and Leadbeater, they didn't intend it as an art manual, did they? There was a bit of a disconnect there.
Precisely. That's a crucial distinction that often gets missed. While the book undeniably became this huge source of artistic inspiration, Besant and Leadbeater themselves never intended to suggest their forms and correspondences as tools for artistic expression.
So what was their aim?
Their primary aim was essentially scientific or observational, to demonstrate how clairvoyants perceive emotions in the human aura and how thoughts manifest energetically. For example, Sébastien Clairbois notes that while many intellectuals in the 19th century imagined systems of correspondence between sounds, colors, shapes, it was specifically in theosophical theories, and particularly in this book, that artists found these easily used tables of correspondence. But the author's goal was just to present examples of what they saw, not to prescribe an artistic method.
So the artist took it and ran with it in a way the authors didn't necessarily foresee.
Exactly. It highlights that significant divergence between artistic inspiration, which freely reinterpreted the concepts, and the original scientific or esoteric intent, which was focused on clairvoyant observation and spiritual understanding.
And this influence isn't just history, right? It still pops up today.
It really does. It continues to resonate. Modern artists like Christine Odlin, for example, still work explicitly with these concepts of thought forms in her multimedia installations, bringing these century-old ideas into new, technologically advanced contexts.
And wasn't there something about a famous jazz musician, too?
Get this, yeah. Even the legendary experimental jazz musician and sort of cosmic philosopher Sun Ra, known for his unique blend of music, philosophy, performance art. He apparently heavily annotated Besant's other book, the related one, Thought Power. It just shows how far and wide these esoteric ideas, starting with theosophy, have spread and influenced incredibly diverse fields.
Wow, Sun Ra, that's amazing. And the book itself keeps appearing in academic settings, too.
Absolutely. It continues to be featured in significant academic and art events, proving its lasting cultural impact and intellectual relevance. For instance, the Beatrice Wood Center for the Arts recently held a workshop based directly on thought forms, looking at how it inspired early abstract painting.
And that biennial in Istanbul.
Right. The 14th Istanbul Biennial in 2015, a major international contemporary art exhibition, was provocatively titled Saltwater, A Theory of Thought Forms. It involved over 100 artists and explicitly honored the Besant Leadbeater work. They even displayed a complete series of framed prints from its first edition.
So it was central to the theme.
Very central. And a part of that Turkish exhibit was later shown in the U.S. as Intention to Know, the Thought Forms of Annie Besant at the Stony Island Arts Bank in Chicago. These events really underscore that the concepts inside thought forms are still seen as highly relevant, deeply inspiring, and worthy of exploration across all sorts of disciplines, from spiritual practice to cutting-edge contemporary art.
Okay, so it's clear thought forms laid this incredible groundwork, especially visually. But let's shift now to the mechanics. How do these egregores actually form and function in the real world? Beyond the clairvoyant observations, it seems like it starts with something pretty basic, something we all do, shared belief and repeated practice.
That's precisely right. The formation of an egregore, its very beginning, lies in that fundamental foundation. Shared belief, yes, collective intention, and crucially repeated practice.
Practice meaning?
Well, every prayer offered to the same deity, every shared ceremony performed by a group, every single moment of focused devotion, every passionate discussion about a shared ideal, every collective action taken towards a common goal, each one adds energetic substance to the forming thought form.
So it's an active process.
Intensely active, yes. It's participatory. It's not just passively observing something appear. It's an energetic contribution through consistent engagement. And the intensity, the clarity of focus from the collective, that directly correlates to the strength and coherence of the resulting egregore.
It's like building something, brick by brick.
Exactly like building a complex structure. Each individual thought or action is a brick. The more bricks laid consistently, the more defined and stable the structure becomes.
And thinking about today, the lightning speed of information online, the digital age, how does that affect how quickly egregores form or dissolve? It feels like it could be much, much faster now than back in Besant and Leadbeater's day.
Potentially, yes. The digital age has almost certainly amplified these dynamics. The rapid spread of ideas, memes, hashtags, the instantaneous collective attention that gets drawn to viral trends, the sheer volume of human interaction online that could accelerate both their formation and, if that attention suddenly shifts elsewhere, perhaps their dissolution too.
So they could be more volatile now.
It's a really interesting modern dynamic. We see movements and online communities coalesce and sometimes disperse with really unprecedented speed. But let's break down the key sort of foundational ingredients that allow these collective thought forms to solidify and gain power, regardless of the era.
Okay. The first, and you could argue the most crucial component, seems to be collective focus.
Indeed. When a multitude of people, could be a small group, could be vast populations, direct their attention, their intention, their emotional energy toward the same concept, the same idea, goal, or even entity, they create kind of psychic resonance.
Psychic resonance.
It's not just mental alignment. Think of it as an energetic pooling. And the more people involved and the more intense, consistent, and unified their focus is, the stronger and more defined this resonance becomes.
Which explains why big institutions have such strong ones.
Precisely. This is exactly why major religions, with millions of devout followers, or popular political movements with their passionate rallies and shared goals, or powerful, long-standing institutions like ancient universities or global corporations, they tend to develop incredibly strong and pervasive egregoric qualities.
You can feel it sometimes.
Absolutely. Think of that palpable collective fervor during a major political rally, where individual voices just merge into this single roar. Or the unified outpouring of emotion during a global sporting event like the World Cup, where whole nations seem to breathe as one. This collective energy acts as a continuous, vital feed. It allows the egregore to grow in power, in coherence, in influence, almost like a living entity taking on more substance and agency over time.
Okay, then the next key ingredient is ritual and repetition. And this one's fascinating because you said it doesn't always have to be consciously magical or spiritual. It can be really mundane stuff.
Absolutely. Regular, consistent practices, whether they're formal, elaborate ceremonies or just deeply ingrained habitual behaviors, they play a crucial role in strengthening, stabilizing, and reinforcing the egregore. They don't need to be consciously magical at all.
Like what kind of mundane things?
Consider, for example, the routine of corporate meetings. Standardized procedures, shared objectives repeated in mission statements, specific jargon or terminology everyone uses, the hierarchical interactions. All of these contribute subtly to the corporate egregore.
Huh. Never thought of a meeting like that.
Or sporting events. You have the anthems, the team colors everyone wears, specific chants, pre-game rituals, all of which unify and energize the collective fan base. Or think about routine social media engagement, the daily check-ins, the consistent posting habits, the shared hashtags that bind communities, the immediate liking or sharing of content that aligns with the group's viewpoint. These seemingly mundane, repetitive daily actions are incredibly powerful feeders for egregores. They reinforce the energetic pathways and solidify the collective thought form.
That really makes me think, how much energy are we unconsciously feeding just through our routines? Could the almost unconscious pattern of the daily commute, or even just the simple habit of checking the news at the same time every day, could that contribute to unseen structures, like urban egregores or powerful media egregores?
It's certainly a compelling and maybe slightly unsettling thought, isn't it? Our habitual patterns, where we routinely direct our attention and energy, they are incredibly powerful forces.
Okay, and the third component, you mentioned symbols and anchors. These are the more tangible things.
Yes. Egregores typically develop or have anchors assigned to them. These are the tangible, often physical manifestations that help focus and channel their energy. They make the abstract concept more concrete and accessible to the people participating.
Right, these are the flags, the logos, the buildings, the things we can actually see and touch that connect us to that larger, unseen force.
Precisely. These anchors can take so many forms. They might be sacred religious icons, like a cross or a statue that concentrates centuries of devotion. They could be instantly recognizable corporate logos that embody a brand's whole ethos and influence, national flags that evoke deep patriotic feelings, distinctive uniforms that bind a group like a military unit or a sports team, or even specific architectural structures, a parliament building, a famous landmark, a venerable university campus.
Like Oxford University.
Exactly. The City Witch source specifically mentions how an old institution like Oxford, with its ancient buildings, its centuries of tradition, its reputation, it has developed its own apparent personality and will over centuries, partly through its persistent physical presence and these deeply ingrained symbols and rituals associated with it.
So the physical place becomes an anchor.
Yes. These tangible anchors provide a concrete focal point. They make the abstract idea of the egregore more accessible, more real for the participants. They serve as a constant reminder, a conduit for collective energy, and almost like a beacon that draws new energy into the egregore's field.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because once you understand these components, the collective focus, the ritual and repetition, the symbols and anchors, you honestly start seeing egregores everywhere.
Yeah.
It literally changes how you perceive the world, doesn't it? From your morning coffee routine to scrolling the news at night.
It truly does shift your perception. Once you begin to grasp how egregores form and function, you start recognizing their presence throughout our world in just incredibly diverse forms. These powerful thought forms, they don't just exist in explicitly magical or religious settings. They emerge wherever human belief, attention, and repeated action create these patterns of collective energy. They are, in a way, the invisible architecture of our shared reality.
Okay, so let's look at some types. Maybe the most readily recognizable and probably the oldest are religious egregores.
Yes, these are often among the most powerful. They've been strengthened through centuries, sometimes even millennia, of unwavering devotion, intricate ritual, deeply held collective belief. They manifest powerfully through sacred buildings, cathedrals, temples, mosques, revered symbols like crosses, stars, mandalas, and through elaborate ceremonies and prayers that unify the faithful worldwide.
The energy must be immense.
Consider the collective energy of a huge congregation during a really powerful service, or the global network of shared belief during a major religious festival like Easter or Ramadan. That energy strengthens its egregore. And importantly, even smaller religious or spiritual movements can develop incredibly potent egregoric qualities through intense devotion, focused practice, and consistent gathering. It shows that sheer scale isn't the only factor. The intensity and coherence of the collective energy matter significantly.
Okay. Then we have cultural egregores. These seem broader, defining whole societies or groups within them.
Absolutely. Nations, distinct cultures, even specific subcultures, they all develop their own unique egregores. These are fed by shared myths, collective histories, long-standing customs, deeply ingrained beliefs. National identities are particularly strong examples, aren't they? They're sustained not just by flags and anthems, but by shared narratives, stories of origin, collective traumas, celebrated victories, national rituals like holidays or Independence Day parades. Cultural movements, too, from the rebellious energy of punk in the 70s to the countercultural ideals of the hippie movement, they also develop distinct egregoric qualities. These define their members, shaping their shared values, their aesthetics, their ways of interacting. These egregores contribute profoundly to our sense of belonging, our collective identity, shaping cultural norms, values, even things we might think of as national character.
Right. And what about the organizations we deal with every single day? Schools, universities, massive corporations, governments, institutional egregores. These must be incredibly powerful, influencing our lives constantly.
They are perhaps some of the most pervasive and often least consciously recognized. Schools, universities, corporations, governments, they all generate immense egregoric energy just through their established structures, their defined hierarchies, their routine practices.
How are they maintained?
They're maintained and strengthened through visible elements like uniforms, distinct logos, iconic buildings, formal procedures, the specific language used, and the myriad routine behaviors that employees or members engage in daily. The example of Oxford University we keep mentioning, having that apparent personality and will over centuries, perfectly underscores how deep and influential these forces run within established organizations.
It raises that question again, doesn't it? How do these powerful institutional egregores influence individual behavior, decision-making within their frameworks? Can they override personal values?
It's a critical question. They can subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, direct individual actions towards the collective goals of the institution. Sometimes even when those goals might not perfectly align with an individual's personal ethics or desires. It's a powerful conforming pressure.
And maybe the newest category, but arguably the most pervasive for many of us now, especially in our hyper-connected world, digital egregores.
Ah, yes, you're hitting on a critical modern development there. These powerful egregores emerge through the vast landscapes of social media platforms, online communities, viral internet phenomena.
How are they fed?
They're fed directly by our digital interactions. Every share, every comment, every viral trend we participate in, every pattern of digital engagement we fall into. These egregores can form and dissolve with astonishing speed, reflecting the incredibly fast-paced, fluid nature of online interaction.
But some are huge and stable, right? Like the platforms themselves.
Exactly. Some, like the major social networks themselves, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, have developed truly substantial, almost overwhelming power. They've achieved this through constant global attention and engagement. They've effectively become super egregores, influencing billions of people daily. This is likely one of the most pervasive forms of egregoric influence many of us experience every single day, whether we consciously realize it or not. They shape our news consumption, our social circles, our political discourse, even our self-image.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to take in. I hope you're enjoying the topic so far. Please subscribe to the DeepSeek Diaries and like this video. Don't forget you can find us on the major social media platforms like YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Linked in the description section are all the resources in discussion today, including books, websites, and so on. So we've covered the history, especially with thought forms, the mechanics of how these collective thought forms come together, and just how pervasive egregores are in our modern world, from ancient religions to digital platforms. But the crucial question for you, our listener, isn't just what are they? It's, okay, what do I do with this knowledge? How do I navigate a world that's constantly being shaped by these unseen forces? This isn't just theory, is it? It's about how we actually move through our daily lives.
That's the absolute essence of it. For anyone interested in, say, personal sovereignty, spiritual growth, or even just more effective social change, understanding egregores isn't merely theoretical. It's intensely practical knowledge. It deeply informs how we move through the world, how we interact with these thought forms day to day.
It changes things.
It transforms our perspective. We shift from being perhaps a passive recipient of all this amorphous egregoric influence to becoming an active participant, someone capable of conscious choice, of genuine agency. It reveals that our attention, our energy, our beliefs, they aren't inert. They are powerful, creative forces that we can actually learn to wield intentionally.
Okay, and the first, most fundamental step in that process then is simply to notice. Recognition and awareness. It sounds almost too simple, but maybe it's profoundly transformative.
It is absolutely the bedrock. It's about cultivating a heightened sensitivity, learning to recognize the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, presence and influence of egregores in your environment. Start by just noticing how different spaces carry distinctly different energetic patterns or vibes.
Like the bank versus the church example.
Exactly. A grand traditional bank building feels vastly different from a quiet, serene church, right? Or a bustling, competitive corporate office feels different from a relaxed, community-focused local shop. These aren't just architectural differences or differences in function. They're profound manifestations of different egregoric energies, built up over time by all the intentions, the transactions, the emotions, the interactions that occur within them.
So pay attention to the feeling of places.
Yes. Pay close attention to how these different energies, subtly or overtly, affect your own thoughts, your emotions, your subsequent behavior. Could this be why we instinctively feel a certain vibe when we walk into specific places or engage with certain online communities? How might the simple yet profound awareness change our daily interactions if we become more attuned to these energetic nuances and their impact on us?
It moves us from just reacting automatically.
A conscious perception.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so once you begin to recognize these influences more clearly, you can then move to the next step, protection and boundaries. What kind of practical exercises or practices can listeners actually adopt? How do you manage your engagement with these powerful forces?
Right. Once you're able to recognize egregoric influences more clearly, you can indeed develop tangible, practical methods for managing your energetic engagement. This isn't about being paranoid, but about being conscious. Some ideas might include...
Like what?
Well, creating personal wards or shields. Before you enter a space with a particularly strong or maybe potentially draining egregoric presence, like a highly politicized event, a large corporate meeting, or even just navigating a particularly toxic online forum, you can consciously create a mental or energetic shield.
How do you do that? Like visualize a bubble?
It could be that simple, yeah. A mental visualization of protective light, or just setting a strong, clear intention. Affirming to yourself that only energy that serves your highest good is permitted to enter your field. It's about setting an energetic boundary, not walling yourself off.
Okay, what else?
Setting conscious intentions. This involves deliberately deciding beforehand how much of your energetic input, how much of your attention you're willing to give to a specific situation or interaction or online platform.
Like setting a timer for social media.
Exactly. Before engaging in a potentially draining online discussion, you might set an intention. I'll read for 5 minutes, maybe post one thoughtful comment, and then disengage. It prevents getting sucked into an endless scroll or argument.
Makes sense. Cleansing practices, too.
Yes, developing cleansing practices is important. After exposure to powerful or draining egregores, it's really helpful to clear your energetic field. This could involve practices like meditation, which helps center and clear your mind. Journaling can allow you to process and release external influences you've picked up. Or simply spending quiet, restorative time in nature that naturally helps reharmonize your energetic system.
And distinguishing your own thoughts.
Yeah.
That seems tricky.
It is perhaps one of the most critical and ongoing practices. Learning to distinguish your own thoughts and desires from those potentially induced or amplified by an egregore. It involves cultivating critical self-reflection, constantly asking yourself, where did that strong impulse come from? Is this intense emotion really mine, or did I pick it up somewhere? Questioning the source of your impulses, your strong emotions, your persistent thoughts.
So it's about self-awareness?
Fundamentally, yes. It's about reestablishing personal sovereignty over your own energetic input and output, preventing unwanted or detrimental influence from overshadowing your authentic self.
Okay, so it's about taking back control of your energy. But beyond just defense, you mentioned there's also this opportunity for active, conscious engagement. That's conscious interaction. It's not about avoiding egregores completely, but choosing how you interact.
Exactly. We cannot, and frankly probably shouldn't, attempt to completely avoid engaging with egregores in modern life. They're too fundamental to human society, to connection. Instead, the real power lies in choosing to interact consciously.
How do you do that? What are the strategies?
Well, several powerful ones come to mind. First, decide which egregores you actually want to feed. This is a radical act of personal agency in today's world. Be deeply intentional about where you direct your precious attention, where you invest your valuable time, and where your hard-earned money flows. Every dollar spent, every minute scroll, every click given it's an energetic contribution, make it count.
Be intentional with your energy.
Second, create or strengthen positive, life-affirming egregores. This is the proactive side. Through intentional group practices, collaborative efforts with like-minded people, and focused, unified energy directed towards shared positive goals, you can actively contribute to forming and strengthening beneficial egregores. Think of community gardens, mutual aid networks, local arts collectives, places where positive energy is being built.
So build the good stuff and starve the bad.
Pretty much. Third, consciously withdraw energy from harmful egregores. This is about active disengagement. It could involve unfollowing or muting social media accounts that constantly feed negativity and division, choosing not to click on sensationalized or fear-mongering content, opting out of consumer patterns that you know support exploitative systems. It's a conscious no.
And finally, working with others.
Yes, work with others to create alternative thought forms. This is the next level of collective agency. By collaborating with others, you can consciously build new egregores. Those explicitly designed to serve life-affirming purposes, fostering connection, promoting justice, supporting sustainability, thereby actively countering existing harmful ones. It's about consciously, collectively building the world you want to see, energetically. And this deep understanding, it really raises an important, very practical question for each of us, doesn't it? If our individual and collective energy is so profoundly powerful in shaping these unseen forces, where should we consciously direct it? And equally importantly, where should we actively, intentionally pull it back? The City Witch source actually provides some very clear guidance here, offering concrete examples.
Okay, let's dig into those. Let's start with some common egregores that, according to that source, anyway, we might want to actively withdraw energy from. First up, maybe one of the most ubiquitous in daily life for many, corporate egregores. And they use Amazon as a prime example.
Right. The egregore of Amazon, for instance, it thrives, it grows on our collective desire for convenience, instant gratification, the illusion of endless, effortless choice. It captures our attention, directs our purchasing power through algorithms, frictionless, one-click buying.
So how do you withdraw from that? It feels so embedded.
The City Witch source suggests very practical, everyday strategies. Things like choosing local bookshops and independent markets for your purchases whenever possible. Accepting longer delivery times when you buy online from smaller businesses rather than defaulting to next day. Actively building relationships with local sellers in your community. And perhaps most powerfully, utilizing public libraries and borrowing networks instead of always buying new.
It's a shift in values, really.
It highlights a profound shift, yeah. Moving from passive, often unconscious consumption towards active, community-oriented choices. It's about valuing conscious intention and local resilience over immediate gratification, prioritizing human connection and local economies over corporate efficiency.
Okay. And what about media egregores, particularly the tabloid kind, or those that seem to thrive on sensationalism and division? They're all over our news feeds.
Absolutely. Tabloid media entities and those broader media ecosystems that prioritize clicks and engagement over nuance and accuracy, they feed voraciously on outrage, on fear, on social division. Their egregores grow stronger with every angry click, every furious share, every moment we spend in reactive engagement.
So how do you starve those? Just stop looking.
Partly, yes, but it's more active than that. Practical strategies include consciously choosing to support independent journalism that prioritizes integrity and thoughtful analysis, breaking the addictive habit of rage scrolling through negative headlines, choosing when and how you engage with news rather than just passively absorbing whatever the algorithm throws at you, and actively creating trusted information sharing networks within your own local communities, maybe sharing articles directly rather than through platforms.
Especially important now with misinformation.
Exactly. The City Witch source suggests strategies that actively build bridges, that counter the U.S. versus them narrative. Things like fostering international friendships and connections, maybe through travel or online groups, supporting refugee and migrant communities in practical ways, critically questioning and deconstructing nationalist narratives. They often rely on oversimplification and historical distortion, and actively creating local community bonds that intentionally cross national, cultural, or perceived ethnic boundaries.
So focus on connection over division.
Exactly. It emphasizes universal human connection, shared humanity, local interconnectedness over divisive ideologies. It actively challenges that us versus them mentality that fuels such egregores and, frankly, often leads to conflict.
And finally, the ones we perhaps spend the most time interacting with daily, often without realizing the energetic cost. Social media platform egregores. You call them the super egregores of our age.
They really are. These powerful digital egregores feed insatiably on our attention, our tendency for social comparison, look how great their life is, and the subtle commodification of genuine human connection. They are literally designed to keep us scrolling, clicking, engaging, extracting our energy, our data, our attention for profit.
So withdrawal strategies here. Delete your accounts.
That's one option for some, but not the only one. More broadly, it involves setting clear, firm boundaries around your usage. Maybe specific times of day you allow yourself to check, or setting time limits. And crucially, intentionally moving important relationships and connections offline into real-world interactions. Seek out alternative, more genuine ways to stay connected with your community and loved ones. Actively participate in creating genuine, maybe private community spaces online or offline that prioritize deep connection over superficial engagement.
So it's about reclaiming your energy.
Fundamentally, yes. Reclaiming your valuable time, your precious attention, and your capacity for genuine human connection from platforms often designed to extract it, allowing you to invest that energy more wisely into what truly nourishes you and your community.
Okay, so that's the what to withdraw from side. What about the flip side? Where can we consciously direct our valuable energy? What are some examples of life-affirming egregores to support, the kind that foster growth, connection, a healthier world?
This is where we get to be conscious architects, right? The source lists several really compelling examples of egregores that thrive on collaboration, mutual support, and shared positive values. Things like
Go on.
women's networks and circles. These are powerful spaces for mutual empowerment. Think consciousness-raising groups, formal and informal mentoring, mutual support networks, intergenerational wisdom sharing, community childcare initiatives, women's health collectives. These spaces actively build solidarity and shared growth.
Okay. What else?
LGBTQ plus communities. These are vital spaces of resilience, celebration, and support. Think of pride celebrations that unify and uplift, chosen family networks providing profound emotional support, mutual aid groups offering practical help, queer arts and culture preservation efforts, youth support programs, health advocacy networks, community archives preserving history and voice, all building collective strength.
Environmental ones too.
Definitely. Environmental protection and regeneration. This is about nurturing the planet. Examples include community gardens and local food networks, local conservation groups protecting natural spaces, seed-sharing networks fostering biodiversity, urban rewilding projects bringing nature back to cities, and the critical preservation of traditional ecological knowledge from indigenous communities.
Community resilience seems key too.
Absolutely. Community resilience initiatives. These build strong, interconnected local communities. Consider things like tool libraries, where resources are shared instead of individually owned. Repair cafes, fostering sustainability and skill sharing. Local exchange systems that bypass traditional currency sometimes. Mutual aid groups providing direct support. Community kitchens nourishing body and spirit. Neighborhood support networks building real local bonds.
And arts and culture.
Yes, arts and culture collectives. These foster creativity, shared experience, human connection. Think independent artist collectives, vibrant community music and performance spaces, accessible public art projects, the preservation of traditional crafts, and vital storytelling circles that transmit cultural wisdom and build empathy.
What's the common thread through all of these positive examples?
What's truly fascinating and unifying about all these examples is that they are fundamentally characterized by collaboration, genuine mutual support, focused local action, and deeply shared values. Values that collectively foster growth, authentic connection, and long-term sustainability. They represent active, conscious alternatives to the divisive, consumptive, or fear-based egregores we talked about withdrawing from. They provide clear pathways for where we can choose to direct our valuable energetic contributions.
Okay, that gives a really practical framework.
Yep.
But let's circle back to the book itself, Thought Forms. How is it actually being received by readers today? We talked about looking at the Amazon customer reviews for that 2020 edition. What's the overall impression? What's the rating like for this century-old text?
It's really interesting. The Amazon UK listing for Thought Forms, a record of clairvoyant investigation, reveals an impressively strong reception, especially considering its age. It currently holds an average rating of 4.7 out of 5 stars. That's from 142 global ratings, so a decent sample size.
4.7 is really high. How does that break down?
Breaking it down further, an overwhelming 81% of those reviewers have given it a perfect 5-star rating. Another 13% have rated it 4 stars. So you're looking at 94% giving it 4 or 5 stars. There are very few negative ratings, just 2% each for 3, 2, and 1 star.
Wow. That indicates an overwhelmingly positive reception then. People are still finding value in it today.
It really suggests its ideas continue to resonate powerfully with contemporary readers, yeah.
So what are the key themes? What are the recurring praises coming through in those positive reviews? What are readers specifically appreciating about this edition of the book today?
Well, one recurring and actually very enthusiastic theme is the exceptional physical quality of the book itself. This specific 2020 edition gets a lot of praise for its production.
People like the way it looks and feels.
Very much so. For instance, a reviewer named Edward Grubchevsky from the UK describes it as a perfect reproduction of the original book with bound pages, cloth-covered hardback bindings, and lovely colored prints. He even goes into detail about the high-quality pattern with gold-plated snowflake prints on the inside covers and calls the overall craftsmanship truly amazing.
High praise. Others agree.
Yes, LJR from the U.S. similarly highlights a gorgeous copy and great price, carefully packed and shipped, underscoring both its beauty and the care taken. And Sydney J. Reginato from Canada calls it a beautiful book and praises its lovely physical book, too, in binding, paper, color, layout. So it's clear that for many readers, the aesthetic, the tactile experience of this edition, the binding, the paper quality, and especially the vibrant reproduction of those original iconic illustrations is a significant and highly valued aspect. It contributes to its appeal as an object you want to own and study.
So it's not just the ideas inside, but the artistry and craftsmanship of the physical book itself that readers are really connecting with. That's a powerful testament to the enduring appeal of the book's visual nature, isn't it?
It really is.
But of course, it's not just a pretty object. The profound and interesting content must also be getting praised, right? What are people saying about the actual ideas within the book?
Absolutely. Beyond the physical beauty, the content itself is consistently lauded for its depth and its thought-provoking nature. A reviewer named Mercedes from Mexico concisely states, "Muy interesante la lectura," which just means very interesting reading, indicating immediate engagement. Ricardo Riddell from Brazil simply says, "Excellent, excellent," a strong, unqualified endorsement.
The Canadian reviewer,
Sydney J. Reginato, the one who praised the physical book, also explicitly notes it is profound in content, suggesting that the ideas within offer significant intellectual or maybe spiritual depth for readers today. These reviews indicate that the book's core concepts, the visual manifestations of thoughts, the energetic nature of consciousness, are still deeply resonating with readers who are seeking to understand these subtler realities.
any really unusual reviews?
Well, we did find that rather unique, maybe cryptic, 4-star review from Diksha Gurung in India, who states, and I quote, bartered it for a Chelsea boot and a Siamese cat.
Okay. Bartered it for a boot and a cat. What does that even mean?
Who knows? While the exact meaning is definitely open to interpretation, it certainly signifies an unconventional appreciation, doesn't it? Or perhaps a symbolic exchange that, for that reader, deemed the book's value equivalent to a very specific, unique trade. It certainly stands out from the others, adds a bit of character to the review section.
That one's a delightful head-scratcher, definitely memorable. Now, beyond the direct reviews themselves, you mentioned that Amazon's customers who viewed this item also viewed section can be revealing. It gives almost a subconscious window into the typical audience and their broader interests. What does that tell us about who's picking up thought forms today? What other topics are they exploring?
That's a really insightful way to look at audience, yeah. And that customers who viewed this item also viewed the section is quite telling in this case. It features books like Energy Healing, which delves into the subtle energy fields of the body and mind.
Okay, makes sense.
Also, The Physics of Consciousness, exploring that intersection of quantum mechanics and human awareness. The Path to Inner Peace, clearly a guide to spiritual tranquility. The Gratitude Journal, which is a tool for mindfulness and positive psychology. And Conscious Healing Unlocked, suggesting self-empowerment and wellness.
So quite a mix, but with a clear theme.
Exactly. This constellation of related books provides a remarkably clear window into the typical readership of thought forms today. Our listeners, if they find themselves drawn to these kinds of topics, are likely interested in holistic wellness, spiritual growth, consciousness studies, mindfulness practices, various forms of self-improvement, personal development.
Sounds like our typical listener profile, perhaps.
It aligns perfectly with that learner persona we sometimes talk about. Someone seeking knowledge that not only provides those aha moments, but also offers practical insights for understanding and navigating their world from energetic principles to personal well-being.
So if you, our listener, find yourself drawn to these interconnected topics, whether it's understanding energy work, exploring the frontiers of consciousness, finding paths to inner peace, or cultivating gratitude and self-healing, then this book, Thought Forms, and the whole concept of egregores are likely right up your alley. It seems to fit perfectly into that broader modern quest for self-understanding, energetic awareness, and conscious personal development. It offers a framework that bridges the esoteric with the very tangible experiences of our daily lives. Okay, so after this really deep dive into egregores, from their historical roots in theosophy and thought forms right through to their modern manifestations in corporations and online, what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you navigate your daily life? As you make choices, engage with communities, consume information, what's the takeaway?
Well, if we really try to connect all these threads to the bigger picture, it suggests something quite profound. It suggests that every single click you make online, every purchase you choose to make, every shared belief you engage with, every single conversation you participate in, it isn't just an isolated act. It is, in fact, an energetic contribution, a direct input into this unseen dynamic fabric of collective thought that is constantly forming and arriving all around us.
Every action feeds something.
Exactly. And this profound realization, it raises a really important, maybe even urgent question for all of us, given that our attention, our intention, and our energy are the very sustenance, the food for these egregores. What new collective thought forms are we unknowingly feeding every single day through our habits, our choices, our apathy sometimes?
And the flip side.
And more importantly, how can we, both individually and collectively, become more mindful architects? How can we consciously choose which egregores to build, which ones to starve? How can we shake the egregores that will inevitably shape our future, the communities we live in, and ultimately the world we truly wish to see emerge? The power, fundamentally, is in our conscious choice. Where do we place our energy?
A powerful thought to end on. Where is your energy going? I hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Deep Seek Diaries. Please don't forget to check out the linked resources in the description section. Hit the subscribe and like button as you head off if you haven't already. Until the next episode, goodbye.